This is a matter of life and death. But I can perform this miracle.
World War II would be over. Our boys would come home.
That's happening, isn't it?
Our work here will ensure a peace mankind has never seen.
Until somebody builds a bigger one.
Hey, Jennifer Walden here, wrapping up my coverage for Mix Presents Sound for Film Awards Season 2023 with the sound team on Christopher Nolan's epic biopic Oppenheimer. We have 4-time Oscar-winning supervising sound editor, sound designer Richard King, 2-time Oscar-winning production sound mixer Willie Burton, sound designer Randy Torres, Emmy Award-winning dialogue and ADR supervisor David Bach, and MPSE award-winning sound effects editor Michael Mitchell. Hey guys, thank you so much for being here to chat about Oppenheimer. So Christopher Nolan, right? He's known for shooting on large format film, but I heard the IMAX cameras are actually quite loud. And these cameras were used for close-up shots, so like scenes with intimate dialogue, you know, 2 people talking. Willie, can you talk about your experience of that on set? Like, what were some of your techniques for minimizing the amount of camera noise that's picked up?
What we do is that one thing that Chris works well with production sound. And even though sometimes we shoot, we use the IMAX to film like intimate scenes, but he'll do one without the IMAX. So with the quiet camera, or if not a lot of dialogue, we will do wild lines because, as you know, Chris hates to loop. So even though the IMAX is used a lot, but there's no way he wants to loop. So we do everything possible that we can to make sure that we don't have to ADR these scenes. So if it is IMAX, it's wild lines. We'll do wild lines and he'll lay the wild lines in later.
Well, a lot of that was taken care of in the cutting room. Jennifer Lame and her team laid up a lot of the wild tracks that Willie mentioned, and which for the most part worked remarkably well. And then Richard and I would go through and tighten up things and maybe find different words if they didn't fit quite as well. And I will say that the noise reduction tools have gotten so much better that we actually were able to use some of the IMAX original camera. There was a few instances we found where they didn't actually, in the wild lines, they didn't say the same thing that they said in the take that was chosen, which is a problem. So we went back, and Gary Rizzo, the dialogue mixer, did a really amazing job cleaning up a lot of that stuff beyond what any of us thought could be done. So, there somehow some of that incredibly noisy camera, even on some of the close-ups, is what you see in the picture.
Did that translate to any ADR, more ADR? Like, what was happening on the ADR front?
As Willie mentioned, Chris hates doing ADR, basically doesn't do any. And of a 3-hour talkie, we shot 20 lines of ADR, and we used 17 of them.
Wow, that's incredible.
On The Creator, I just shot 650 lines of ADR.
Oppenheimer, it's really incredible in terms of the scale of objects that needed sound design. So, you know, you're tasked with coming up with the sound of the biggest explosion the world had seen at that point, the Trinity test, but also the smallest thing that had been discovered at that point, quantum particles. So can you talk about defining the scale of that through your sound work?
Well, those two events are actually related, obviously. And the goal with portraying the quantum particles and the particle wave duality of light and those kind of very minute things was to convey the latent energy in them, this enormous latent energy that is there. And, you know, to imagine that the Trinity explosion was basically a ball of metal about the size of a softball exploding. Only that much material caused that huge explosion. So every visualization of that world needed to convey power, like almost like you weren't sure if you were looking at atoms or at planets. And Randy did a lot of really cool work. He and I both did, but Randy did a lot of really cool work on coming up with some of the quantum wave sounds, and that actually happened pretty quickly. We came up with a lot of that stuff pretty fast. But that was kind of the basic notion, was to make those small things sound almost as big or as big as the big things.
Randy, take it away. Let me hear about this cool stuff you did.
I was just mostly just looking at the movement of how these things were moving, and obviously we don't know what it would sound like in real life. So we're just trying everything we could to just see what would match the movement of the atoms and the particles. And I just always say, like, I always ask Richard if he believes that that's what that sounds like, and we just kind of, that's usually the process, and that's where we take it.
Even if we had instruments delicate enough, you couldn't either see or hear any of these things because they're smaller than a light wave, and there's no atmosphere obviously at that quantum level, so there's no way for sound to propagate. So it was just a feel thing, pretty much. It was trying to convey that feeling of it's got to be really cool, but it's got to sound really powerful and like a little scary. Like there's this latent force that could be unleashed, and that they realize can be unleashed, and it was just and running it by Chris and seeing if he had the same feeling. If he felt like it was, the right feeling. I think the one that was the hardest to do was the black hole simulation that Robert's describing in one of his classes before the Manhattan Project begins, how black holes are formed, and with this inexorable crushing to the point where all of this mass, all of this matter basically is crushed down to nothing, and which is a nothing of infinite mass and infinite heat. And Chris wanted it to convey the impression that it's continuing to shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And we couldn't really, it was very difficult to come up with how to end that and how to convey that sense that it's continuing to compress and shrink. So that was probably the most difficult one, I think. Do you think, Randy?
And the stomps, which isn't a part what we're talking about, but the stomp. Because it's so rhythmic, and when we would get a new version of a scene, we would have to change the rhythm of the stomps, and it's just difficult sometimes.
and the stomps, which Willie recorded in the Fuller Lodge scene, and those were the recordings that we used. It wasn't a rhythmic stomp all the way up to chaos, up to frenetic stomping. It was there were some kind of rhythm shifts in there that had to be fixed, and the associate picture editor did a lot of that. Mike Fay, but Randy did an awful lot too, and there was a constant like examining and after you've looked at something a lot, you start to kind of pick up on those two stomps seem further apart than the other.
12th stomp
to go back and and it was like Randy was going a little bit mad, I think.
I was yelling at the stomps. Yeah.
Willie recorded it with a lot of mics, so there's a lot of different textures and a lot of different ways that we could mix the sound, so that it gave us a lot of latitude given how much material we were given for that.
Yeah, recording about 6 microphones. We had microphones all over the place, close up, medium, wide. We played over mics just to get the stops, and I realized post will do the rest, and you guys did. Good job.
Sounds like a recipe for madness.
We sprinkled a little Foley in there, but it's 90% production. And then Michael did just a whole lot of there's a lot of sound effects editing in that movie, and Michael's a brilliant sound effects editor who's I worked on every one of Chris's movies, I think going back to The Prestige, right, Michael?
Right. Yeah, that was the first one we did.
Every one of Chris's movies that I've done, Michael's done.
Yeah, this one was cool just in the sense that I mean, even all of the sound effects editing kind of played into that game of atomic, microscopic, viewing of things. Even that first shot of the film with him staring into the water and seeing the droplets of water. All that stuff kind of translates to the same goal of trying to represent this person who's got this incredible perception thing going on, and conceiving of all these things that are, for us inconceivable. So that was just a fun thing to try to replicate those things by being, very exacting. And I mean, Randy and I placed every one of those drops in the stereo field where it should be. It was a crazy, very microscopic kind of editing, and I love that kind of stuff.
That's about my favorite shot, and the favorite thing that I think that you did, Michael, was the droplets in the water in the beginning of the movie.
The whole movie, I actually watched it again last week just because I had, kind of forgotten a lot of things about it. So it was fun to kind of revisit all of that stuff. And it really struck me to be of a piece, that all of the stuff came together in such a beautiful way. I'm just really proud of the soundtrack and how it kind of represents so well that movie. And Chris does that every time. I mean, he's a very exacting filmmaker, and so he's going over things and over things and over things until he gets it the way he wants it. And that, to be part of that process is a lot of fun for me.
This film captures scale in another way too, across, all the different locations and through the different times of Oppenheimer's life. So it's really incredible in that way. Can you talk about some of the ways that you use sound to help define those different locations and also define this story moving through time?
We definitely, thought about, okay, what does Pasadena sound like? What does Berkeley sound like? What does Los Alamos sound like? And we're all very familiar with those places. So it was about building up that kind of world, and all the little machines, and Geiger counters and this and that. I mean, that was all just, part of getting us into that world.
We try to find a sound that would immediately take us to a new location, because we're in so many locations and we jump between them so quickly that it was, we really tried to give us a sound cue.
Yeah, like the birds in when he talks to Einstein, when Oppenheimer goes to speak with Einstein. There's this very deliberate bird that happens there that is. I mean, those kinds of things are a lot of fun to me, and I've always I always like kind of, being able to find those things that kind of give the moment of something different.
Yeah, we wanted to use something special every time we see Einstein, some special sound. The first time we see him, when Oppenheimer looks out the window at him at Princeton, I cut in some very, very distant geese, which just is something we don't hear elsewhere in the movie. And it sounds like a fairly prosaic, ordinary thing, but I think it just lends a little bit of sort of specialness to that, because we're seeing this special person that that started all of this, basically, that set all this in motion, and then also setting scene and location and time. Dave did a lot of work for Los Alamos, creating a sense of place there, because there really wasn't a lot visually to cue us. The actual town of Los Alamos was huge, but the town they built was relatively small. So we really wanted to create a sense of scale and scope, and sense of people and activity. And it's an army base, so Dave got a bullhorn, and Chris Flick, our Foley supervisor, and they went out into some woods and recorded kind of random babbling PA voices that interspersed the scenes. And a ton of group you did, right?
Yeah, and as we've found we really like to do is, when possible, we record outside to replicate what we're trying to get, because it's very difficult to recreate a real sense of space and distance from humans yelling when you're all inside a comfortable studio, no matter how large it is. And so we bring the actors out. We had about 15, I think, each day. And there's a place in the Warner Brothers backlot called The Jungle. We ended up out there, found it was really worked well for our purposes here. And we could spread them out. Yeah. And even with all that noise around the lot, we were a little concerned about it, but it turned out to not be a problem, because the things that would cut through were the construction yelling at a distance, and then, of course, all the cheering after the Trinity tests in the various locations. So we had to just layer and layer. Plus, I'm very happy with how some of the party scenes came out, because these Warner Brothers locations also have some facade houses there, and they were all accessible to us. So when we needed to hear a raging party going on inside a house, but we're outside the house, we'd put them in the house, have them doing a raging party. We're recording inside, but we're also recording from many different perspectives. So outside the house at 10 feet, outside the house from 30 feet. And that way we could blend and find the right combination that really sounds like what we all know what that sounds like.
And so do you take a team of recordists out there with you, or do you just set up a bunch of mics and run it all yourself? Or
no, I don't. We've often used our recordist, Eric Potter, and he does a great job. He brings many microphones, though. He's got some surround mics, and then a whole series of stereo mics.
I think it's kind of a macho thing. The more mics he brings,
I think he's compensating. Yeah, for sure.
Eric's a good secret weapon on any movie.
Eric's brilliant. Yeah, Eric's brilliant.
So there's a beautiful scene after the Trinity test explosion. So later in the film, right, the Trinity test explosion happens, and we see it, but we don't hear it yet. There's this 30-second delay. I really liked this part of the film before we hear the explosion, because you're with the characters there in that situation. Wow, it actually went off, and holy crap, we're still alive, and they're still taking it all in. So can you talk about the sound of the scene and how you use sound to help create this quiet, tense moment? Was it always that quiet? Was that always the plan? Or were there other iterations or other approaches to that moment?
No, that was always the plan that Chris and Jennifer came up with, the way they cut the scene. And it's effective because first of all, it's realistic. It's per physics, takes that amount of time for the sound to reach the shockwave to reach the bunker. But it's also counterintuitive in that you assume you're going to hear the big bang when you see the big light.
Like every movie does, when you see an explosion, you better hear it.
I think the audience realizes, the reason is because they're far away. But I think it also it's a little bit of a surprise, and it makes the audience feel a little bit unnerved.
Especially because what leads up to that is, because it's so frenetic leading up to that, and then suddenly there's just this moment of silence,
of kind of awe, yeah, and you just hear them breathing and kind of taking it in, and then the shockwave hitting is sort of the end of the event. It's at that point everyone can take a deep breath and realize, we succeeded. We made it, and it worked. And so it's just really, really effective the way that Chris and Jen cut it, and all of that's production, all of that throughout that section, all of that's Willie's sound, and we just added a few pieces of machinery. There's a tiny bit of Foley here and there, but it really needed to be delicate to kind of be the counterpoint to, as Michael said, all the frenetic, excitement leading up to it.
I think we took the breaths, Willie, from some of those quiet takes that you did from some of the other scenes, like some of the scenes with Florence when they were quiet in the hotel room.
Well, for me, when I saw the film for the first time, and it went off, and it was so quiet, I'm saying, "Where's the sound? Where's the sound?" I was panicking. Where's the sound? But and then when the sound came, I was, oh my God, this is so incredible. A lady was sitting next to me. She spilled her soda all over.
You can bill Richard for the dry cleaning.
But that is cool, the way that when it does explode, and we hear it, it's cool how it, every location is really kind of carved out in that explosion, and you understand how close Oppenheimer and his group were, and how far away Teller and that group were, and the folks in between, the soldiers. So that was a fun moment, I think, as well, that everybody did a really cool job on. That it just you really felt the massiveness of it, but also those very specific locations.
Yeah, one of the big challenges I've realized over the years with Chris is that if he had his preference, he would only use production. That would be the only sound in the movie. That it would be, he would record everything on set, and because he feels like it's a lot more real. It's a lot more connected to the picture. And so one of our jobs as sound folk is to try to make given that you can't just use production, that you need to add a world around that production, to make that world sound like production, to make it sound as real and visceral, which speaks to Dave's approach at recording the group outside. So it really does sound like production. It has noise on it. It's not absolutely pristinely quiet. But that makes it better in a way. And then the work that myself and Michael and Randy do to make the atmospheres and the sound effects sound like they're in those spaces with the correct reverb and EQ, and that's one of the real big challenges with Chris. And it was something I really like about it, to try to create that photoreal world that sounds like it's part of the production and sounds like it's part of that fabric of that same world.
Well, that's all the time that I have for today. Great work on this film. Oppenheimer was just incredible. Like you said, all the heart and the action and the science. I mean, it's got everything. So best of luck to all of you this award season.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.